Every morning I left the same $5 tip at a small neighborhood cafe. But one morning, the waitress quietly pushed the bill back into my hand. Her face had lost its usual warmth. She pressed the bill into my hand and whispered, "Don't trust your son. You're in danger." I forced a smile and walked away convinced she had misunderstood something. Outside, I unfolded the $5 bill and discovered a tiny note hidden inside. The moment I finished reading it, every memory, every promise. "You found revenge, Dad, and I'm glad you did. Tell me in the comments what city or country are you watching from right now. Let's see how far this story travels." One thing before we start: some elements in this story are fictional, added for entertainment and educational value. The characters may not be real, but the message absolutely is. The morning light comes through the window at an angle I've come to know better than my own reflection. It falls across the corner table, my table, and catches the rim of the coffee cup in a way that makes the whole diner feel like it belongs to a quieter version of New York City, one that hasn't checked its phone yet, or remembered what it owes. I sit down at 7:30, same as always. The chair scrapes against the hardwood floor, same as always. And before I have even unfolded my newspaper, Emma Collins is already walking toward me with the coffee pot in her right hand and a smile that she clearly means. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," she says, turning the cup right side up and pouring without being asked. "You're 40 seconds late today." I was starting to worry. 40 seconds, I say, and I feel the corner of my mouth pull up despite myself. "You're timing me now. I've been timing you for 2 years." She sets the pot down on the edge of the table and tilts her head. "You're never late. So either something went wrong with your car, or you stopped to help someone on the sidewalk. Which was it?" "Elderly woman with a broken umbrella," I say. "Corner of Fulton and Broadway." Emma laughs, a real laugh, the kind that starts somewhere in the chest and doesn't ask permission. "Of course it was." She pulls out her order pad, even though we both know she doesn't need it. The usual, the usual. She scribbles nothing on the pad, tucks it back into her apron pocket, and heads toward the kitchen. I watch her stop on the way to refill the cup of a man in a postal uniform who hasn't asked for more coffee, then pause to pick up a set of keys that an older woman in a yellow raincoat has dropped near the door. She hands them back with both hands and a "Here you go, ma'am," that sounds like she genuinely means it, because she does. That's the thing about Emma Collins. She doesn't perform kindness. She just does it the way some people breathe. I've been coming to Maple Corner Coffee for almost 2 years now. It's a narrow place on a busy block in Lower Manhattan, the kind of diner that shouldn't survive this close to the financial district, but does because Maggie Cooper has been running it for 19 years and knows that what people need at 7:30 in the morning isn't atmosphere, it's familiarity. The booth cushions are a deep burgundy that's faded to something closer to rust. The menu hasn't changed since the second Obama administration. The coffee is strong enough to make your eyes focus before you're ready for them to. Maggie herself is behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with the focused expression of someone defusing a bomb. She's a broad-shouldered woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair pinned back tight and a voice that carries across the entire dining room without her raising it even slightly. She catches my eye and gives me a short nod, the same nod she's given me every morning for 2 years, which, in Maggie Cooper's language, means good to see. You don't make a fuss about it. Emma comes back with the blueberry muffin on a small white plate, sets it down with a little more ceremony than the situation requires, and says, "How's the knee?" "Better," I tell her. "You said that last week." And I meant it last week too. She gives me a look that is equal parts skepticism and amusement, the look of someone who has heard too many men claim they're fine. And then she leans one hand on the edge of the table and says, "I have a contracts law final on Thursday, 40% of the grade. Are you ready?" "I'm terrified," she says very honestly. "But I've read the case studies 4 times, so I think being terrified and being prepared can exist at the same time. And they can," I tell her. "In my experience, the ones who aren't terrified before something important are the ones who haven't understood what's at stake." She thinks about that for a second, then points at me with 2 fingers, like she's filing it away. "I'm writing that down when I get home tonight." She straightens up. "Anything else before the rush hits? Just the newspaper when you get a chance." "Already on the counter," she says, and she's already moving. I watch her go, and I reach into the inside pocket of my coat and take out the $5 bill I've folded there every morning for going on 40 years. I set it on the table beside the coffee cup, smooth it flat with 2 fingers, and I look at it. The way you look at something that means more than it costs. $5. The same $5, or rather, the same denomination, the same ritual every single morning, without exception. Rain snow the week after Claire died, when I could barely remember to eat the morning after the quarterly board meeting that ran until midnight and left me feeling hollowed out in ways I didn't have words for. $5 every time. Nobody at Maple Corner has ever asked me why. Emma has come the closest once, maybe 8 months ago. She picked it up and held it for a moment before sliding it into her apron and saying, "One day I'm going to figure you out, Mr. Bennett." I had told her she was welcome to try. What she doesn't know, what nobody here knows, is that 40 years ago, I was a 25-year-old man sitting in a diner, not so different from this one, staring at a $5 bill, and understanding for the first time in my life what it meant to have nothing left to lose. My truck had run out of gas on the I-95 service road. I had exactly $5 in my wallet, enough for the cheapest coffee on the menu, which left me 83 cents short of the gas I needed to make my delivery, collect my payment, and keep my fledgling business from collapsing before it had finished its first week. A waitress young, maybe 22, with dark hair and a way of moving that suggested she had somewhere more important to be and had chosen to be here anyway, had watched me do the math on a paper napkin and come up short. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't make a speech. She simply picked up the $5 bill I had left on the table and pressed it back into my hand, closing my fingers around it with both of hers. "Keep it," she said. "Today you need it more than I do." I never learned her name. The diner closed 8 months later, and by the time I went back to look for her, there was a cell phone store in its place. I've spent 40 years leaving $5 on tables in her honor, which I recognize sounds like the kind of thing a person does when they can't think of anything better. But it's also the only way I know to keep saying thank you to someone who will never hear me say it. I don't know yet, sitting here with my coffee going warm in my hands and Emma Collins laughing at something Maggie Cooper has just said from behind the counter, that the woman who changed my life is closer than I have ever imagined. I don't know yet what this week will cost me or what it will save. I don't know yet that the $5 bill sitting on this table right now is about to become the most important thing I own. All I know on this particular Tuesday morning in October is that the light is good, the coffee is strong, and for 40 seconds I was late. Claire used to say that the $5 bill was our real founding document. She said it the first time I told her the story. We were sitting in the cab of my truck parked outside a hardware store in the Bronx eating sandwiches because we couldn't afford a table yet. And she laughed so hard she had to put her hand over her mouth to keep from choking. Then she wiped her eyes and said very seriously, "Richard, that woman saved us both and she doesn't even know it." I told her I thought about that every single day. Claire said, "Good, keep thinking about it. The day you stop is the day you start believing you did this alone." I never stopped. Bennett Logistics started in 1986 with 1 truck, 2 clients, and a contract that nearly killed me to land. By the time Daniel was born, we had 11 trucks and a leased warehouse in Queens. By the time he started kindergarten, we had offices in the 3 states. By the time he graduated college and came to work for us, we had more than 4,000 employees across the country and contracts with some of the largest retailers in North America. Claire managed the financial side with a precision that made our accountants nervous and our investors confident, and I ran operations with the kind of relentless focus that is only possible when you have someone at home who makes you feel like what you're building actually matters. She was the one who kept the $5 story alive. She told it at dinner parties, at industry conferences, at Daniel's 8th birthday when he asked how Daddy's company had started. She always told it the same way: the truck, the gas, the diner, the woman, the words. And every time she finished, she'd look at me across whatever room we were in and smile the way she smiled when she wanted me to understand something without her having to say it out loud. What she wanted me to understand was this: we did not build Bennett Logistics. Kindness built it. We just showed up every day and tried to be worthy of the head start. Daniel heard that story so many times he could recite it by heart. When he was 9 years old, he climbed up onto the running board of my oldest truck, the one I'd kept in the company garage as a kind of monument, and announced in a very loud voice that when he grew up he was going to drive the same roads I had driven and deliver things to people who needed them. I laughed until my ribs hurt. Claire stood in the doorway of the garage with her arms crossed and her eyes shining and said, "You are absolutely your father's son." That was the version of Daniel I held on to. The 9-year-old on the running board, with grease on his shoes and a future wide open in front of him. 3 years ago, that future got complicated. Claire's diagnosis came in January: pancreatic cancer, stage 3 discovered, late the way it almost always is, because it doesn't announce itself until it's already made decisions on your behalf. She handled the news the way she handled every crisis in our 40 years together. She sat very still for about 30 seconds, Then she reached across the kitchen table and took my hand and said, "Okay, tell me what we're going to do." We fought it for 11 months. We flew to specialists in Houston and Boston, and once to a research hospital in Minnesota that was running a trial she qualified for. We did everything the doctors suggested and several things they hadn't. Claire went to every appointment with a legal pad full of questions and came home and typed up her notes and sent them to our primary oncologist with a thoroughness that made the man tell me privately that she was the most organized patient he had ever treated. She lost the fight in December, on a Tuesday morning in our bedroom on the Upper East Side, with the city doing what the city always does outside the window, and the two of us holding on to each other, the way you hold on, when you understand that holding on is all that's left. I sat in that bedroom for a long time after. I don't know exactly how long. The light changed. Someone knocked on the door, our housekeeper, I think, and I told them I needed more time. I kept waiting to feel something specific, something that would tell me how to proceed. But what came instead was just the weight of 40 years sitting down on my chest and staying there. Daniel flew in from Chicago that evening. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Claire had taken my hand 11 months earlier, and he cried the way men cry when they've been trying not to for a very long time. Ugly, ragged, uncontrolled. I put my arm around my son, and I felt him shake, and I thought this. This is what matters. Not the contracts, not the revenue, not the square footage of the warehouses. This boy. This grief that proves how much he loved her. 3 weeks after the funeral, I called Daniel into my office and told him I was stepping back from the day-to-day operations. I told him I wanted him to take the CEO position, full operational authority, personnel decisions, contract approvals, company development. He stared at me for a long moment with his mother's eyes in his father's face and said, "Dad, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "You've been ready for 2 years. I just needed to be ready to let go." What I kept was the chairmanship of the board and the right to veto any decision involving the sale merger or fundamental restructuring of the company. I kept it not because I didn't trust Daniel, but because Claire had asked me to. In the hospital during one of our last real conversations, she had gripped my wrist with a hand that had gotten too thin and said, "Promise me you'll protect it. Not forever, just until you're sure. Promise me you'll know when you're sure." I promised. What I didn't tell Daniel, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I had already drafted the paperwork to transfer the chairmanship to him on his 40th birthday. 6 months away. A surprise. The kind of gift that can't be wrapped, that you have to build over years before you can give it in a single moment. I had been so certain he was ready. I take a long sip of my coffee and look out the window at the corner of Fulton Street, where a delivery driver is double parked with his hazard lights on, arguing cheerfully with a traffic cop who was not writing a ticket, just talking, both of them laughing now at something one of them has said. 40 years ago, I was that driver, minus the laughter, minus the certainty that everything was going to be fine. I fold my newspaper to the crossword page and pick up my pen, and I tell myself that today is a good day, that the light is coming through the window at exactly the right angle, that Emma Collins is going to pass her contract's final on Thursday, and that whatever comes next, I built something real. I believe all of that completely and without reservation for exactly 22 more minutes. Then Daniel's wife walks into my life, and nothing is ever quite the same again. Victoria came into Daniel's life at a fundraising gala in Chicago 18 months after Claire's funeral, and she came into mine at a dinner table on the Upper East Side 4 months after that. And I knew within the first 20 minutes that something about her made the air in the room feel different. Not wrong exactly, just different. The way the air feels before a storm, when the pressure drops and your ears haven't quite caught up to what your body already understands. She was stunning in the way that takes effort and money and a very particular kind of discipline. Dark hair swept back a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A handshake that was firm and direct and lasted exactly 1 second longer than necessary. She looked me in the eye when she spoke, which I respected. She laughed at the right moments and asked intelligent questions about the logistics industry, which I also respected. She said all the right things about Claire. Daniel has told me so much about her. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, and her voice carried just the right amount of warmth, the measured warmth of someone who has learned that warmth is a tool and applied it carefully. Daniel watched her the way a man watches someone he is still slightly afraid of losing. His eyes tracked her across the room, even when he was talking to me. When she touched his arm, his whole posture changed. He stood straighter, smiled faster, became somehow more and less himself at the same time. I recognized the dynamic because I had felt it myself once with Claire. The difference was that when Claire changed me, I always felt more like who I actually was. Watching Daniel with Victoria, I had the uneasy sense that the man standing across from me was being slowly edited. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself that grief makes you suspicious of happiness, that a father watching his son fall in love will always feel a twinge of something that isn't quite jealousy, but lives in the same neighborhood that Victoria was smart and beautiful, and clearly devoted to Daniel, and I was an old man looking for problems where there weren't any. I told myself all of that for about 14 months. The changes were gradual enough that I could explain each one away individually. Daniel stopped calling on Sunday evenings, which he had done every week since Claire died. He started showing up to board meetings with a new kind of restlessness, a barely contained impatience that hadn't been there before, the energy of a man who has started to resent the room he's sitting in. He began using phrases I hadn't heard from him before: full autonomy, operational independence, the next chapter, phrases that had the particular quality of words someone else had chosen and handed to him. Once in the elevator after a quarterly review, he said to me, "Dad, don't you think it's a little unusual for a man my age to still need his father's sign-off on major decisions? I looked at my son, my 39-year-old son, who had grown up watching me make those decisions, who had sat beside me in boardrooms for 12 years, learning exactly how and why each one mattered, and I said very carefully, "The sign-off isn't about your age, Daniel. It's about protecting 4,000 people who depend on this company to still exist in 10 years. He nodded, but his jaw was tight and he looked at the elevator doors instead of at me, and when they opened he walked out first and didn't wait. That was 6 months ago. Things had not improved since. Victoria. I saw less frequently. She and Daniel had a townhouse in Tribeca and a weekend place in the Hamptons and a social calendar that kept them moving. But when I did see her, I noticed things. The way she steered conversations away from certain topics with a smoothness that was almost invisible. The way she asked questions about the company's valuation with an interest that went slightly beyond casual. The way she once at a family dinner in September said to Daniel in a voice clearly intended to carry, "A man who built what your father built deserves to enjoy it fully, not to keep managing it from a distance." And then smiled at me with a warmth that didn't reach the very back of her eyes. What none of us knew at that dinner table, what I would not learn for another several weeks, was that Victoria Sinclair Bennett was carrying a debt that would have buckled most people's knees. $12 million. The number, when Jonathan would eventually lay it out for me, had the quality of something that couldn't possibly be real. $12 million in combined losses from a series of private equity investments that had looked brilliant on paper and collapsed spectacularly in practice, accelerated by a lifestyle. The townhouse, the Hamptons house, the wardrobe, the charity galas and first-class flights and private members' clubs that had continued uninterrupted while the investments disintegrated beneath it. She had borrowed against everything she could borrow against. She had restructured debt twice. She had moved money between accounts in ways that a forensic accountant would later describe to a federal grand jury as consistent with deliberate concealment. She needed a lifeline, and she had decided with the cold precision of someone who has run out of other options that Bennett Logistics was it. The plan, as I would later understand it, had been forming for nearly 6 months before that Tuesday morning in October. It involved Marcus Reed, our chief financial officer, a trim, careful man in his mid-40s who had worked for the company for 11 years, and who it turned out had agreed to betray everything he knew about it in exchange for a promised $3 million and the guarantee of his position under new ownership. It involved Victor Hale, a corporate attorney in Midtown, who had a reputation for finding ways through legal documents that other lawyers considered impassable and who had been retained at double his standard rate to find one here. And it involved Daniel, who had been told in the quiet hours of enough evenings that his father did not trust him, that the chairmanship Richard refused to surrender was proof of that distrust, that a man who truly believed in his son would have let go by now. Daniel had resisted. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me. Daniel had resisted at first for months. He had defended me to his wife in arguments I would only hear about later, had told her that I had my reasons, that I had always had reasons, that she didn't understand how the company worked or what I had sacrificed to build it. But resistance is a muscle, and muscles tire. And Victoria Sinclair Bennett was patient in the way that only desperate people are truly patient, the patience of someone who has no alternative plan and cannot afford for this one to fail. The agreement with the investment fund had been signed 6 months ago. If the sale went through, Daniel would receive $25 million in a performance bonus. Victoria would receive $8 million through a consulting company registered in her brother's name in Delaware. Marcus Reed would receive $3 million and his job title. Victor Hale would receive his fee and no further involvement. All they needed was my signature on a set of documents that would strip me of every meaningful power I still held, hand control of the board to Daniel, and clear the path to a sale I had never agreed to and would never have approved. All they needed was Friday. I don't know any of this yet, finishing my crossword at the corner table of Maple Corner Coffee while Emma Collins refills my cup without being asked. And Maggie Cooper wipes down the counter, and the morning light moves across the floor, the way it always does. I don't know about the fund or the agreement or the $12 million or the documents that are already printed and waiting in a conference room on the 32nd floor. What I know is that my coffee is good and my newspaper is interesting, and in 22 minutes, something is going to change. I just don't know yet what it will cost me to change it back. What I'm about to tell you, I wasn't there to see. I'm telling it the way Emma later wrote it in her letter. The letter she left in a manila envelope behind the counter at Maple Corner, addressed to me in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper, the handwriting of someone who needed the words to stay put. I've read that letter so many times the fold lines are soft. I know it by heart. But I want you to understand that what happened in room 4 on Monday night happened to a 24-year-old woman who was alone and afraid and did something anyway. That's the part that matters most. Emma Collins had been on her feet for 9 hours by the time Maggie Cooper knocked on the kitchen door at 9:47 p.m. and told her that the private dining room at the end of the hall, room 4, the one with the mahogany table and the projector screen, and the door that locked from the inside had a technical problem. The projector had lost its signal. The 4 people inside needed it fixed. They asked specifically for someone who knows the AV setup. Maggie said, already handing Emma a cable pouch. "That's you." Emma pulled off her oven mitts and pushed through the kitchen door. Her feet ached the way feet ache after a double shift, the deep bone ache that no amount of sitting down fully fixes. She had a contracts law textbook in her locker, with 47 pages still unread, a cold cup of tea she'd been trying to finish since 7 o'clock, and an exam on Thursday that was worth 40% of her grade. She knocked twice on the door of room 4 and pushed it open. The room smelled of expensive coffee and dry erase markers. The projector screen at the far end was dark, its blue standby light blinking in a slow, indifferent rhythm. 4 people sat around the table, 2 men she didn't recognize on the far side, a woman in a charcoal blazer at the head, and a younger man with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, who was typing something on his phone with the focused irritation of someone who had expected this evening to go differently. The HDMI connection probably worked itself loose, Emma said, already moving toward the screen. "I'll have it fixed in 2 minutes." Nobody responded. The woman in the charcoal blazer. Victoria, though Emma didn't know her name yet, glanced at her once with the flat, assessing look of someone categorizing a piece of furniture, and then turned back to the man across from her. Emma crouched behind the projector unit and found the cable connection. It had, as she'd suspected, pulled free by about a centimeter. She pushed it back and secured the locking ring, then checked the secondary input to make sure the signal was clean. Behind her, the conversation in the room continued. "The amendment language on page 41 needs to be tightened before Friday," said one of the men. She didn't know a precise, measured voice with the cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Victor Hale, though she wouldn't learn his name until later. Right now, it's technically accurate, but a careful reader could flag it. "He's not going to read carefully," said the woman. "That's the point." "We don't make assumptions," Victor said. "We make it clear." Emma kept her hands moving. She had learned in 2 years of waiting tables in a city full of people who treated service staff as invisible that invisibility was sometimes useful. She had heard pieces of conversations that would have made the participants redden if they had known she was listening. Business negotiations, marital arguments, a sitting city councilman discussing a zoning variance that had not yet been made public. She had never repeated any of it. It wasn't her business. But then the man with his jacket off said something that made her go very still. "What about the medication?" he asked. His voice was lower than the others, with a reluctance in it that might have been guilt or might have been simple risk calculation. "You're sure about the dosage?" "Marcus confirmed it with someone who knows," Victor said. "It won't cause harm. It will cause confusion. Long enough to get through the documents." Emma's hands stopped moving. Her heart rate, she would write later, went from normal to something she could feel in her throat. She stayed crouched. She kept her breathing even. She looked at the cable connection she had already fixed and pretended to examine it further. Behind her, the woman in the charcoal blazer said, "Once the amendment takes effect, Daniel controls 4 of 5 board seats. The chairman's veto disappears. We moved to close within 72 hours. The second man, she didn't recognize Marcus Reed's CFO, a name she also wouldn't know until later said, and if he asked questions at the signing. The medication handles that, Victor said, and I'll be there to redirect anything he raises about the language. That's what I'm paid for. The man with his jacket off. Daniel put his phone face down on the table. He's going to be alone when he reads it. Wans ora di om espas. He's always alone, Victoria said. He doesn't bring counsel to internal signings. He hasn't in years. He'll bring Jonathan Pierce, Daniel said. Not if you tell him it's routine, Victoria said, and her voice carried the particular patience of someone who has explained something multiple times. Tell him it's the annual compliance package. Tell him it's 40 minutes and then he can go home. He trusts you, Daniel. That's the entire foundation of this. A pause. Then Daniel said, I know. Emma did not move for a long moment. The projector screen behind her had flickered back to life when she'd fixed the cable, throwing a blue glow across the room. She could see her own shadow on the wall, crouched and still, and she thought, if any of them look at that shadow, it is over. Then Daniel's phone lit up on the table. He reached for it, glanced at the screen, and said in a completely different voice, a softer voice, a son's voice. That's my father. He sits at the window table here every morning, the one by the front door. Emma looked at the phone. The contact name on the screen read R. Bennett. She knew that name. She knew the window table. She knew the man who sat there at 7:30 every morning with his newspaper and his Americano and the $5 bill he left without fail, the man who had once asked her how her evidence law midterm had gone and actually listened to her answer, the man who said good luck when she left for her evening classes and meant it in the specific way that people mean things when they have watched someone work very hard for something. Her right hand moved into her apron pocket and found her phone. She pressed record. She stayed crouched behind the projector for another 4 minutes, her phone running in her pocket, her breathing so controlled it made her ribcage hurt, while Victoria outlined a timeline, and Marcus confirmed a wire transfer account. And Victor said one more time, the language on page 41, it needs to be tighter. When she finally stood up, she turned to the room and said in the most normal voice she had ever produced, all fixed. The signal should hold for the rest of the evening. Victoria didn't look up. Marcus was writing something. Victor nodded once dismissively. Daniel looked at her for exactly 1 second, long enough for her to see something moving behind his eyes that she couldn't name, and then looked back down at the table. Emma walked out of room 4, pulled the door shut behind her, and made it exactly 11 steps down the hallway before her legs stopped cooperating. She put one hand flat on the wall and pressed hard and took 3 breaths and told herself out loud in a whisper, you are fine. You know what you heard. You are fine. Then she pushed off the wall, straightened her apron, and walked back to the kitchen. Victor Hale's voice floated down the hall behind her, low and deliberate, speaking to Marcus. Find out who that girl is. Make sure she wasn't paying attention. Emma's spine went cold from the base of her neck to the bottom of her tailbone. She kept walking. I noticed her hands first. In 2 years of sitting at this table, I have watched Emma Collins carry hot plates through a crowded dining room without spilling a drop, pour coffee into a moving cup on a busy morning without looking down, and balance 3 dessert orders on one arm while writing a 4th on her notepad with her free hand. Her hands are steady, the way the hands of people who work hard and pay attention are steady. Not the steadiness of someone who has never been tested, but the steadiness of someone who has been tested enough times that their body has learned to trust itself. This morning, when she sets my Americano in front of me, the spoon rattles against the inside of the cup. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else in the dining room to notice. But I notice because I have been sitting at this table long enough to know what Emma Collins' hands look like when they are working normally, and this is not that. Good morning, she says, and her voice is exactly right. Warm, even the voice she uses with every customer, but her eyes are moving. Not at me. Past me over my left shoulder toward the front door. She checks it the way you check something you are afraid of quickly, like you don't want to be caught looking. Good morning, Emma, I say. How are you? Fine, she says too fast. Completely fine. Can I get you your muffin? She is gone before I answer. I watch her move through the dining room, and I feel something shift in my chest. Not alarm, yet not quite, but the precursor to alarm, the physical sensation of a man who has spent 40 years reading rooms, beginning to read this one. Emma stops at the counter to put in my order, and Maggie Cooper says something to her in a low voice, and Emma shakes her head in a short, tight movement that says, "Not now," without saying anything at all. I am reaching for my newspaper when the bell above the front door chimes. Two men walk in. They are not the kind of men who come to Maple Corner for the blueberry muffins. They are both somewhere in their late 30s or early 40s, both wearing dark suits that fit well enough to be expensive and sit wrong enough to suggest the men inside them are not accustomed to sitting still. The taller one has a jaw that looks like it was designed by someone who wanted to convey authority without having to say a word. The shorter one carries a leather portfolio under his arm and scans the room the way people scan rooms when they are looking for something specific and already know roughly where it is. They approach the counter. The tall one speaks to Maggie Cooper. I am 4 tables away, and the morning noise of the diner covers the words. But I watch Maggie's face, and I see her expression do something careful and controlled, the expression of a woman who has decided in real time what she is and is not going to say. She gestures toward the far end of the dining room, toward the hallway that leads to the private rooms. Emma is coming out of the kitchen with my muffin when she sees them. She stops walking. For one full second, she stands in the middle of the dining room, holding a small white plate, and the color drains out of her face so completely and so quickly that I am halfway out of my chair before I understand why I am moving. Then she takes a breath, squares her shoulders, and keeps walking toward my table, away from them. And I sit back down and watch her set the muffin in front of me with a hand that is trembling so finely it is almost invisible. "Here you go," she says brightly, professionally, perfectly. The two men have moved toward the hallway. The tall one pauses near the kitchen door and says something to the shorter one. And even across the room, even under the noise of the morning, I catch 4 words in the gap between a passing busboy and the hiss of the espresso machine. "Make sure she didn't." That is all I hear, but it is enough. Emma has heard it too. I can tell by the way her chin drops for just a fraction of a second, by the way her jaw tightens, by the way she presses her lips together hard, like she is keeping something inside that wants very badly to come out. The two men leave. The bell above the door chimes again. The dining room continues doing what dining rooms do, cups clinking chairs, scraping someone near the window, asking for a check. And Emma Collins stands at my table with a coffee pot in her right hand, and a decision in her eyes that I can see her making in real time. She reaches into her apron pocket with her left hand and takes out the $5 bill I left on the table 3 minutes ago. I watch her fold it quickly with the practiced efficiency of someone folding something small around something smaller. And I understand before she speaks that whatever she is about to do, she has already thought through what it will cost her. She sets the coffee pot on the edge of my table. She leans forward like she is topping up my cup, which she does not need to do because it is still 3/4 full. And she takes my right hand in both of hers and presses the folded bill into my palm and closes my fingers around it. Her hands are shaking so hard I can feel it in my own bones. She brings her face close to mine, close enough that I can see that her eyes are bright with the specific brightness of someone who is refusing through sheer effort of will to cry in a public place, and she says in a voice so low it is barely a vibration in the air between us, "Don't trust your son. You are in danger." Then she releases my hand, straightens up, picks up the coffee pot, and says in a completely normal voice that carries to the 3 nearest tables, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm afraid we're not accepting gratuities today. House policy." A woman 2 tables over looks up from her phone. A man by the window glances over. Maggie Cooper behind the counter goes very still. I look at Emma's face. She is already turning away, already moving, already becoming, again, the version of herself that belongs to everyone in this room and not just to me. But for one moment before she turns her eyes, find mine, and what I see in them is not panic and not apology, but something that hits me somewhere behind the sternum and stays there. It is the look of someone who has decided that doing the right thing is worth what it costs. The look of someone who has already paid in advance. I stand up. I button my jacket. I say, "Of course. Thank you for the coffee," in the voice I use when I am in a meeting, and everything is fine, and absolutely nothing is fine. I walk out of Maple Corner Coffee at 7:58 in the morning, with the $5 bill closed in my fist, and I do not look back and I do not run. And with every step I take down the sidewalk toward my car, my heart is hammering so hard against my ribs that I can feel it in my back teeth. I reach my car. I get in. I close the door. I open my hand. The bill is folded around something. A small piece of paper torn from what feels like an order pad. The writing pressed deep into the surface in the same hard, urgent handwriting I will later come to know as Emma's. I smooth it flat against my knee and I read it. and the morning I thought I understood disappears completely. The note says, Friday they will make you sign over control. Check the board annex. Don't drink anything Daniel or Victoria gives you. I read it 3 times. Then I fold it carefully and put it in my inside jacket pocket next to my heart, which is beating considerably faster than a 65-year-old man's heart should be beating at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. The first thing I feel is not fear. It is a question. How does a 24-year-old waitress know the exact details of a boardroom plan that involves 4 people who would have had every reason to make sure no one was listening? I don't have an answer. But here is what I know about Emma Collins after 2 years of 7:30 mornings. She has never exaggerated, never dramatized, never said anything to me that wasn't true. She told me once that her evidence law professor said, the most important skill a lawyer can develop is the ability to distinguish between what a witness knows and what a witness believes. Emma Collins knows the difference. The specificity of that note, not something is wrong, but Friday the board annex don't drink anything is not the specificity of belief. It is the specificity of a woman who heard something and wrote it down exactly. I pick up my phone and call Daniel. He answers on the second ring, warm and easy, the way he always sounds when he thinks a conversation is going to go his way. Dad, what's up? I wanted to confirm Friday's schedule. I say, what time do you need me there? 10 o'clock, he says. Jonathan doesn't need to come. It's just the annual compliance package. 40 minutes, maybe less. You'll be home by noon. I keep my voice completely level. Why the in-person signing this year? We've done the compliance package remotely for the last 2 years. A pause. 2 seconds. I count them. New audit procedure, Daniel says. The board's outside counsel wants wet signatures on everything going forward. It's just a formality, Dad. The answer is plausible. The pause before it is not. Of course, I say. I'll be there at 10. I end the call, and I sit in my car on the street outside Maple Corner Coffee, and I think about my son's voice in that 2-second gap. The specific quality of silence that belongs to someone who is reaching for an answer they prepared in advance and making sure they have the right one. I have heard that silence in boardrooms for 40 years. I have never heard it from Daniel before. I start the car, and I drive to Tribeca. Jonathan Pierce has been my personal attorney for 23 years. He is a lean, sharp-eyed man in his late 50s who has the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who think faster than they move. He sits very quietly, right up until the moment he needs to act, and then he acts without hesitation. His office is on the 4th floor of a narrow building on Warren Street, the kind of office that hasn't been redecorated since it was first furnished, because nothing about it needs to change. I sit across from his desk, and I tell him everything. The note, the call, the 2-second pause. Jonathan listens without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about him. When I finish, he turns to his computer and pulls up the company's document management system, and for about 90 seconds, the only sound in the room is the clicking of his keyboard and the distant noise of Warren Street 4 floors below. Then he stops clicking. There is no board annex in the compliance package as filed, he says. And there should have been a 7-day advance notice to all board members before any amendment to voting rights. That notice was never sent. He looks at me across the desk with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he very much hoped was not true. Richard, someone added something to those documents after they were finalized, and they didn't want you to see it before Friday. My chest tightens like a fist closing around something it cannot afford to drop. I think about Daniel on the phone, just a formality Dad and I think about Claire in the hospital, squeezing my wrist and saying, "Promise me you'll protect it." And I think about a 9-year-old boy standing on the running board of a truck, asking if all of this would be his someday. I told him yes. Get someone into the servers, I tell Jonathan. Tonight. Jonathan is already reaching for his phone. They arrive at 7 in the evening with a bottle of Chateau Margaux and smiles that have been practiced somewhere between Tribeca and the Upper East Side, refined in the elevator on the way up, and deployed at my front door with the coordinated ease of 2 people who have rehearsed this without admitting to each other that they are rehearsing. I know this because I have spent 40 years reading people across tables, and because Emma Collins told me not to drink anything they give me, and because the Chateau Margaux is a 2018 which retails for roughly $400, and Daniel has not brought me an unannounced gift worth $400 since he was trying to convince me to let him study abroad his junior year of college. Dad, Daniel says, and he steps forward and hugs me, and I hug him back, and I feel the tension in his shoulders, the way you feel a fault line, not with your eyes, but with your hands, with some part of you that is older than conscious thought. This is a surprise, I say, stepping back to let them in. We were in the neighborhood. Victoria says, which is not true. Nobody who lives in Tribeca is ever casually in the neighborhood of the Upper East Side, and she leans in to kiss my cheek, and I smell her perfume, something expensive and precise, and she is already moving past me toward the kitchen, the bottle held in one hand, like she has been here 100 times, which she has not. I'll open this, she calls back, already out of sight. You two sit down. I lead Daniel into the living room. He sits on the couch across from Claire's chair. My chair now, though I still think of it as hers. And he looks around the room the way he has always looked around this room, the way people look at spaces that raise them, with a complicated mixture of comfort and something that might be guilt. He is wearing a charcoal suit, without the jacket, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the way he rolls them when he is trying to seem relaxed and is not. How was your day? I ask him. Good, he says. Productive. Lot of calls. He picks up a coaster from the coffee table and sets it down again. Quiet, I say. I had coffee this morning, took a drive. He nods. His knee is bouncing slightly, a habit he has had since he was 12 years old and has never fully extinguished. Claire used to put her hand on it during family dinners to make it stop. There is nobody to do that now. Victoria comes back with 3 glasses and the open bottle on a small tray. She has found the tray in the 3rd cabinet from the left, which tells me she has been in my kitchen before without my knowing it, because I have never shown her where I keep the trays, and she sets everything on the coffee table with a smile that is warm and practiced and lands slightly to the left of genuine. She pours. She hands Daniel his glass first, then reaches for mine and holds it out to me, and I take it, and I feel the cool stem between my fingers, and I think of Emma's handwriting pressed deep into the paper. Don't drink anything Daniel or Victoria gives you. I bring the glass to my lips. I tilt it. I do not drink. We wanted to talk to you about something, Victoria says, settling into the armchair across from me, with her own glass and the comfortable authority of a woman who has decided this conversation is already won. There's been some serious interest from a fund we've been in conversation with. International group, very strong track record. They want to acquire Bennett Logistics. I look at her over the rim of my glass. Is that right? The number they've put on the table, she says, would change everything for this family. It would give Daniel the kind of financial freedom that lets him build something entirely his own, without the weight of the company's history on his shoulders every single day. I look at Daniel. He is looking at his wine glass, turning it slowly by the stem. Daniel, I say, is this what you want? He looks up, and for just a moment, just one, I see the 9-year-old boy on the running board of the truck, the boy who wanted to deliver things to people who needed them, and then it passes and he says, I want to stop feeling like I'm running a company that isn't really mine. The words land like something dropped from a height. Not because they are cruel, Daniel has never been cruel, but because I can hear underneath them the months of evenings and quiet conversations and carefully chosen phrases that produce them. I can hear Victoria's work in every syllable. I set my glass down on the table without drinking from it. Bennett Logistics is not for sale, I say. It was never for sale. The people who work there, 4,000 of them, chose this company because it has a certain way of operating a certain set of commitments. The fund you're describing has a documented history of eliminating those commitments within 18 months of acquisition. I won't do that to them. Daniel's jaw tightens. You retired, Dad. You stepped back. I stepped back from operations, I say. I did not step back from responsibility. Victoria puts her hand on Daniel's arm gently, the way you steady something you are about to use, and says, he just wants the chance to prove what he's capable of. Is it so hard to imagine giving him that? I look at my son. He looks at the coffee table. His knee has stopped bouncing, which is somehow worse. I know what you're capable of, I tell him. I've always known. What I do not tell him is what I have in my briefcase upstairs, the document with his name at the top and a date 6 months from now, and a title he does not yet know is waiting for him. I do not tell him because I am not sure in this moment, looking at the man sitting across from me and the woman sitting beside him, whether that document still means what I thought it meant. When Victoria goes back to the kitchen to check on something, she says she left on the stove a detail that rings as false as the rest of the evening, since I can smell nothing cooking. I move quickly and without drama. I lift my glass and I set it in front of Daniel, and I move his glass to where mine was. He comes back to the table. He reaches for the glass in front of him. He drinks. 12 minutes later, Daniel sets his glass down on the coffee table and presses the heel of his hand against his forehead. I don't know why I'm so tired, he says, and his voice has gone soft at the edges, slightly unfocused, the voice of a man whose thoughts are moving slower than he expects them to. I think I've been overdoing it this week. Victoria looks at him with an expression of practiced concern. We should go, she says. Let you rest, Richard. I stand with them. I walk them to the door. I tell them I'll see them Friday. Daniel hugs me again in the doorway, and his grip is looser than it was 2 hours ago, and he smells like the wine, and I hold on to him for one extra second because he is my son, and I love him even now, even tonight, even knowing what I know. They go down in the elevator. I close the door. I stand in my entryway for a long moment, my back against the door, my hand still on the handle, and I breathe through what I am feeling, which is not anger and not grief, but something that combines the worst of both and adds a cold, hollow core that I do not have a word for. Then I go to the kitchen. I find a Ziploc bag. I seal the bottle inside it with the care of a man who understands that what he is holding is no longer a bottle of wine. I call the private lab in New Jersey, and then I sit in Claire's chair, and I look at the city, and I wait for morning, Wednesday morning. 7:30. I walk through the door of Maple Corner Coffee, and I know immediately that something is wrong because Emma Collins' apron is folded on the end of the counter, neat and flat, the way you leave something when you were not planning to come back for it today. Her section has been covered by a young man I recognize from weekend shifts. He moves efficiently enough, but he doesn't know that the customer at table 3 takes her coffee with oat milk and no lid, and he doesn't know that the man by the window likes his muffin warmed, and he doesn't know any of the 100 small things that Emma knows because she has been paying attention for 2 years. He is doing his best. His best is not Emma. I sit at my table. I order my coffee. I take out my phone and I call Emma's number. It rings 4 times and goes to voicemail. Her voice on the recording is brisk and professional. You've reached Emma Collins. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. I hang up without leaving one. I call again. Same result. Maggie Cooper is watching me from behind the counter with an expression I have not seen on her face before a careful measuring. The look of a woman deciding how much to say and to whom. She has run this diner for 19 years. She is not a woman who makes decisions carelessly. I catch her eye. She gives me the smallest possible nod, barely a movement more, an intention than an action, and holds up one finger. 1 minute. I wait. I drink my coffee. I watch the door. 3 minutes later, Maggie comes out from behind the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder and walks to my table with the unhurried purpose of a woman delivering a check. And she sits down across from me, which she has never done before in 2 years. And she puts both hands flat on the table and leans forward and says, very quietly, She came in at 6 this morning, before anyone else. She left something for you. Where is she now? I ask. I don't know, Maggie says, and the worry in her voice is real and unguarded. The worry of a woman who has watched a young person work hard and is now afraid for her. She wouldn't tell me. She said she needed to be somewhere they couldn't find her. She said to give this only to you, only if you came in alone, only if nobody was watching the door when you came in. She reaches into the front pocket of her apron and takes out a manila envelope standard letter size sealed with the metal clasp pressed flat. My name is written on the front in the same handwriting as the note, the same hard-pressing letters, the handwriting of someone who needs the words to stay exactly where she puts them. I take it. I put it inside my jacket. Thank you, Maggie, I say. She stands up. She puts the dish towel back over her shoulder. She looks at me with the directness of a woman who has earned the right to say what she thinks. She's a good kid, she says. She works 2 jobs and she studies law, and she has never once complained about any of it in 2 years. Whatever is happening, you make sure she's okay. I will, I tell her, and I mean it the way I meant things to Claire completely, without qualification as a promise rather than a reassurance. I leave cash on the table for the coffee and I walk out and I sit in my car and I open the envelope. Inside is a USB drive no larger than my thumbnail and 3 pages of handwritten letter on maple corner notepaper, the kind with the small green logo at the top that Emma has probably written 100 law school outlines on during slow afternoon shifts. I read the letter first. She writes the way she talks clearly without excess, with the precision of someone who has been trained to distinguish between what matters and what doesn't. She tells me about Monday night. She tells me about room 4, the HDMI cable, the 4 people who kept talking because they assumed a waitress wouldn't understand what they were saying. She tells me what she heard in the order. She heard it. And she tells me that when Daniel said that's my father, and she saw the name R. Bennett on his phone screen, she felt the floor move under her feet. She writes, I don't know if I did the right thing. I know I couldn't do nothing. You've been kind to me for 2 years, and I don't think kindness should go unanswered. The recording is on the drive. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I was scared. I'm still scared. But I think you needed this more than I needed to feel safe. I fold the letter. I put it back in the envelope with the USB. I sit in the car for a moment, with my hand pressed flat against the envelope through my jacket over my heart. And I think about a 24-year-old woman hiding in a friend's apartment in Brooklyn, with her phone turned off because she did the right thing, and it frightened her. And I think about the $5 bill I leave every morning, and I think this is what it travels toward. This is where it goes. I call Jonathan. She got us everything, I tell him. Now find a way to make sure she's safe. Already working on it, he says. But Richard, you need to hear what's on that drive before tonight. Before I tell you exactly what Jonathan found on those servers that Wednesday afternoon, the numbers, the names, the document that would have taken everything from me, drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a 9. So, I know you're still here with me. A reminder, this story contains fictional elements woven in for dramatic and educational purposes. Some details have been shaped for storytelling. If that's not for you, it's okay to step away now. Jonathan spreads the documents across his desk in a particular order. Not chronological, not alphabetical, but in the order of their damage from bad to catastrophic. And I understand within the first 30 seconds that I am looking at the most carefully constructed betrayal I have ever seen. Walk me through it, I tell him. He picks up the first sheet. Our cybersecurity consultant pulled the server access logs last night. At 2:17 in the morning this past Sunday, an administrative account logged into the document management system and accessed the compliance package for Friday's signing. He sets the sheet in front of me and points to a highlighted line. The IP address belongs to Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed, 11 years with the company, 3 children, a house in Westchester he bought the year I promoted him to CFO. I hired him out of a mid-sized firm in Philadelphia because he had the sharpest eye for financial risk I had seen in someone his age, and because he reminded me a little of myself, at 34, hungry and careful and determined to prove something. What did he change, I ask, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel. Jonathan picks up the second document. The original compliance package is routine annual governance review, standard certifications, nothing that requires your personal attention beyond a signature. What Marcus added is a board amendment buried in the appendix, 41 pages in. He slides it across the desk. In summary, the amendment transfers the right to appoint 4 of 5 board members from the full shareholder group to the sitting CEO. It eliminates the chairman's veto on any transaction above $50 million, and it allows the CEO to approve a merger or acquisition without board ratification, provided the deal closes within 90 days of the amendment taking effect. I look at the language on the page. It is dense and technical and written in the specific way that legal documents are written, when the goal is clarity for the drafter and confusion for the reader. If I sign this, I say, Daniel controls the board within 48 hours. And the sale closes within the week, Jonathan says. You would retain your shares, you'd still be the largest individual stockholder on paper. But the new board could vote to remove you from the chairmanship at their first meeting, and Daniel could approve the acquisition without your consent. Legally, by the time you understood what had happened, it would already be done. The word legally lands in the room like something thrown. There's more, Jonathan says. He picks up a third document, thicker, printed on letterhead I don't recognize. Daniel signed a preliminary agreement with the acquiring fund 6 months ago. It's contingent on the amendment taking effect, but the terms are already negotiated. He opens it to a page near the back and slides it across. Daniel receives a $25 million performance bonus upon close. Victoria receives $8 million through a consulting firm registered in Delaware under her brother's name. Marcus Reed receives $3 million and a guaranteed position as CFO under new ownership. I look at the numbers on the page. I look at my son's signature at the bottom, his handwriting that I have known since he was 7 years old, the same loose left-leaning cursive he has always had. This is a violation of his fiduciary duty, I say. On multiple levels, Jonathan says, and now his voice has an edge in it. Not anger exactly, but the specific intensity of a man who takes the law seriously, and is looking at someone who treated it like an inconvenience. As CEO, Daniel has a legal obligation, a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. Secret self-dealing, undisclosed compensation, and conspiracy to strip the chairman of his rights are not consistent with that duty. That's civil liability before we even discuss the criminal exposure. He pauses. And Richard, the criminal exposure is significant. Federal fraud conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, document forgery. The USB recording adds administering a controlled substance pending the lab results. I stand up and walk to the window. 4 floors below Warren Street is doing what Warren Street always does in the late afternoon delivery, trucks foot traffic, the particular energy of lower Manhattan winding toward evening. 40 years ago, I drove the truck on streets like this one and believed with the certainty of someone who has nothing to lose that if I worked hard enough and treated people fairly enough, everything would eventually be all right. I believed that this morning too. This morning feels like a long time ago. What do we do? I ask the window. Jonathan's chair scrapes back. I hear him stand. We let Friday happen, he says. We let them walk into the room believing they've won, and then we make sure they're wrong. My phone buzzes on the desk behind me. New Jersey area code. The lab results are in. The lab technician's name is Dr. Patricia Weller, and she has a calm, unhurried voice that belongs to someone who delivers difficult information for a living and has made peace with the fact that the information does not become less difficult because of how calmly it is delivered. The wine sample you submitted contains 2 compounds, she says. The first is a benzodiazepine, a class of sedative commonly used in low doses for anxiety treatment. The second is a calcium channel blocker, which functions as a blood pressure reducer. Individually, both are prescription medications with legitimate medical applications. Combined in the concentrations present in your sample, the effect in a healthy adult would be significant: cognitive impairment, reduced reaction time, and difficulty sustaining focused attention. In a person over 60, the effect would be more pronounced and would likely persist for 3 to 4 hours. I am sitting in Jonathan's office with the phone on speaker and a legal pad in front of me on which I have written nothing because my hand stopped working about 30 seconds into Dr. Weller's explanation. How long after ingestion? Jonathan asks. He is leaning forward with both forearms on the desk, his pen moving steadily. Onset would begin within 15 to 20 minutes, Dr. Weller says. Full effect within 45. Jonathan thanks her and ends the call, and we look at each other across the desk. And I think about Daniel at my kitchen table 12 minutes after he drank from the wrong glass, pressing his palm to his forehead, saying, "I don't know why I'm so tired," in a voice that had gone soft at the edges, and I feel something move through my chest that is cold and final and clarifying in the way that only the worst things are clarifying. They were going to walk him through 100 pages of documents, I say, while he couldn't think straight, and have Victor Hale there to redirect any question he raised, Jonathan says. It's thorough. He says the way you say something that deserves a grimmer adjective. He picks up his phone and makes a call I have been expecting since Tuesday morning. The woman who arrives at Jonathan's office 40 minutes later is Dr. Sonia Reeves, Senior Special Agent with the FBI's White Collar Crime Division, and she enters the room the way people enter rooms, when they are used to rooms changing, when they walk in, not dramatically, not with performance, but with the settled authority of someone who has been doing difficult work for a long time and no longer needs to announce it. She is in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the kind of posture that suggests she was told to stand up straight once and decided it was good advice. She shakes my hand and Jonathan's hand and sits down and says, "Tell me everything and don't edit." So we do. Jonathan lays out the documents. I play 30 seconds of Emma's recording from the USB Victoria's voice saying he won't have the power to stop us clear and cold and unmistakable. Dr. Reeves listens without interrupting, which is the same quality I value in Jonathan, and which tells me something about the kind of people who are good at their work. When we finish, she is quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of someone running calculations. The recording functions as lead evidence, she says. It directs the investigation. The primary evidentiary weight falls on the server access logs, the lab results, and the preliminary sale agreement, all independently obtained, all clean. She looks at me. We don't move before Friday. We let them set the table. We walk in after the food is served. We'll have the federal warrant in hand by Thursday morning, she adds. Everything will be in order before we step into that building. You want them on record, Jonathan says. I want them on record in the room with the documents in front of them, she says. I want a confession, not just a paper trail. I nod. I understand the logic. I also understand that it means 2 more days of pretending. That evening I call Daniel. He answers on the first ring, which tells me he has been waiting. "Dad," he says, and his voice has the particular brightness of someone who is trying not to sound relieved. "Everything okay? I've been sitting in your mother's chair," I tell him, and my voice does something I do not entirely control. It softens genuinely because the statement is true, and the truth of it costs me something. I kept thinking about what she would say. You know how she was? She always believed in moving forward. A pause. When Daniel speaks again, something in his voice has shifted, opened slightly the way a door opens when the person on the other side finally hears the right knock. Yeah, he says quietly. She did. I'll sign what needs to be signed on Friday, I tell him. I think it's time. Dad. His voice breaks just slightly at the edge of the word. That means a lot. It really does. I say goodnight. I end the call. I put the phone face down on the desk, and I press both hands flat against the surface, and I breathe through what I have just done. Use Claire's memory as a key to open a door I intend to walk through and close behind me. She would understand. I believe that. I have to believe that. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Emma Collins is sitting in a friend's apartment with her phone turned off and her contracts law textbook open in her lap, not knowing that the 30 seconds of audio she recorded in a room where she was supposed to be invisible is about to bring 4 people to the attention of a federal grand jury. Friday is 1 day away. I don't sleep Thursday night. I try for about an hour lying in the dark in the bedroom Claire and I shared for 31 years, staring at the ceiling with the particular alertness of a man whose body understands that tomorrow is not an ordinary day, even if his mind keeps trying to pretend otherwise. The city hums outside the window, sirens a garbage truck, making its rounds on 5th, the distant percussion of someone's music 3 floors down, and none of it is loud enough to cover the quiet inside the room, which is the loudest thing in it. At 11:30, I give up. I pull on the cardigan I keep on the chair by the door. Claire bought it for me at a shop in Edinburgh the year we took Daniel to Scotland for his 14th birthday. Dark green wool with 2 buttons missing that I have never replaced, because replacing them would require acknowledging that they are gone, and I go down the hall to the sitting room, and I lower myself into Claire's chair. The chair faces the window. From here I can see the park, or the darkness where the park is, and above it, the lit windows of the buildings on the far side, hundreds of small rectangles of yellow light. Hundreds of people inside them, doing whatever people do at 11:30 on a Thursday night. Living mostly. Going about it in the ordinary way. I don't know how to do this one, I tell her. I have talked to Claire in this chair before. I am not confused about what I am doing. She is not here. She cannot hear me. The words go nowhere except into the dark room and back. But there is something about sitting in the place where she used to sit looking at the view she used to look at. That makes the distance between us feel slightly less absolute. Grief is not rational. I stopped expecting it to be a long time ago. I know what has to happen tomorrow, I tell her. I know what I have to do, and I know how to do it, and Jonathan has prepared everything, and Sonia Reeves has her people in place, and the evidence is solid. That's not the part I don't know how to do. I pause. Outside a siren winds up and then fades toward the park. The part I don't know how to do is look at him across that table and remember that he is still our son, even now, even after all of this. The room doesn't answer. The room never does. But sitting in it, I find something that is not quite peace and not quite resolution, but is enough to keep me in the chair, which is enough for tonight. I think about Daniel at 8 years old, running through this apartment in his socks on Christmas morning, sliding on the hardwood floors, crashing into the couch with a laugh that came from somewhere so deep in his chest, it sounded like it belonged to a much larger person. Claire had stood in the kitchen doorway in her robe, coffee in hand, watching him with an expression of such uncomplicated joy that I have kept it in some part of my memory, like a photograph, the particular way the morning light came through the east window and caught her hair the way she looked at me over his head and mouthed, "Look at him," like she couldn't quite believe he was ours. I think about Daniel at 15, sitting across from me at this same sitting room table after the worst report card of his academic career, expecting anger, and getting instead a 2-hour conversation about what he actually wanted from his life. He had cried, which surprised both of us. He had said, "I don't want to disappoint you with the raw honesty that teenagers produce when they have run out of defenses." And I had told him that the only way to disappoint me was to stop trying, and that a bad semester was not the same as stopping. He had gone back to school the following Monday with something different in his posture. Claire had noticed it before I did. I think about Victoria's voice on Emma's recording, saying he won't have the power to stop us, and the particular coldness of it, not cruel exactly but indifferent. The indifference of someone for whom the man being discussed is an obstacle rather than a person. And I think about Daniel hearing that voice every evening for 2.5 years, coming home to it, sleeping beside it, being told again and again in 100 different framings that his father's caution was his father's contempt, that the chairmanship withheld was proof of a trust withheld, that waiting was the same as being diminished. He should have been stronger, I know that. A man does not get to blame his choices on the voice in his ear. But I also know what it is to be tired and to want something very badly and to have someone beside you who has decided that wanting it is the same as deserving it. I know how that particular gravity works. I spent 40 years building something so that Daniel would never have to feel it, and it found him anyway. At 2 in the morning, I go to the desk in the study and I open the bottom drawer and I take out a folder. Inside is a single document. The chairmanship transferred Daniel's name at the top. His 40th birthday is the effective date. My signature already on the line at the bottom. I have been carrying this document in this drawer for 4 months, waiting for a morning I could give it to him over breakfast and watch his face change. I put it in my briefcase. Then I go back to Claire's chair, and I sit until the sky outside the window begins to go from black to the particular blue-gray that means morning is coming, whether you are ready for it or not. And I think I kept the promise. I protected what we built. Whatever he has done, I never stopped being his father. That has to be worth something. At 5 o'clock, I go upstairs and I put on my best suit, the charcoal one Claire always said made me look like a man who had already won the argument. And I check the recording device Jonathan gave me. It is small enough to fit inside the top button of my left lapel, which has been loosened slightly to accommodate it. I press the button. A faint green light blinks once and goes out. I pick up my briefcase. I am ready. I'm about to walk into that boardroom. I know what's in those documents. I know what's in the wine, and I know exactly what I'm going to say. Before I do, type 32 in the comments. 32 for the floor where everything is about to change. Let me know you're still here. Quick note, this story carries fictional elements added for entertainment and educational depth. If you prefer content without any fictional framing, feel free to choose something else, no hard feelings. The elevator opens on the 32nd floor at 3 minutes before 10, and the first thing I see is Daniel. He is standing in the corridor outside the boardroom, with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets, and when the elevator doors part and he sees me, something moves across his face. Relief, I think, and beneath it, something more complicated that I do not have time to name, before he is already walking toward me, with his arms open and his smile in place. The smile I have known for 39 years. The smile that started as a toothless grin in a hospital room on the Upper West Side and became over 3.5 decades this practiced warm, slightly too wide. Dad. He hugs me, and I hug him back, and I feel the stiffness in his shoulders that he is working hard to hide the particular tension of a man who has been rehearsing this moment for weeks and is now discovering that no amount of rehearsal fully prepares you for the thing itself. I'm glad you came. Of course I came, I say. I said I would. He steps back and looks at me with something that might be gratitude or might be relief or might be guilt wearing the wrong coat. And then he gestures toward the boardroom door. Everyone's already inside. The boardroom on the 32nd floor is a room I have sat in hundreds of times, long mahogany table. 16 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows on the east wall that look out over Midtown Manhattan on clear days and into a wall of gray on overcast ones. Today the sky is overcast. The city muted and flat behind the glass, and the room has the particular quality of stillness that belongs to spaces where something important is about to happen, and everyone inside knows it, and nobody will say so. Victor Hale is at the far end of the table, a stack of documents in front of him, organized with the precision of a man who has done this before and intends to do it again. He is in his early 50s, silver-haired with the unhurried manner of someone whose entire professional value lies in making complicated things appear simple. He nods at me when I enter. I nod back. Marcus Reed is 2 seats to Victor's left, a leather folio open in front of him, a pen in his hand that he is clicking in a slow metronomic rhythm that he stops the moment I look at him. He has the expression of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake and has decided the only available response is to see it through. He says, "Good morning, Richard," and his voice is almost steady. "Marcus," I say. Victoria is standing at the credenza along the sidewall, pouring water from a glass pitcher into 4 cups with the focused attention of someone who needs something to do with her hands. She turns when I enter and gives me the smile, the one that lands just to the left of genuine, and says, "Richard, so good of you to come. Can I get you some water?" "I'm fine," I tell her. "Thank you." I pull out the chair at the near end of the table opposite Victor, with Daniel to my left, and I set my briefcase on the floor beside me, and I unbutton my jacket and I sit down, and I think about the green light that blinked once in my lapel at 5 o'clock this morning and went out, and I think recording. Victor slides the document stack toward me. It is substantial. I count the pages as I square them against the table, an old habit, and reach 93 before I stop. The pages that require my signature are marked with yellow adhesive tabs, 8 of them distributed through the document at irregular intervals that have the specific irregularity of someone who wants the signing to feel routine and comprehensive at the same time. It's largely standard language, Victor says, and his voice has the warm, reassuring cadence of a man who has spent a career making people comfortable with things they should not be comfortable with. Annual governance review, standard officer certifications, updated indemnification clauses. The whole thing should take us about 30 minutes. Of course, I say. I open the document to page 1. I begin to read. Not skim read. Every word, every clause, every subordinate phrase and parenthetical reference, the way I read contracts in 1987 when I didn't have a lawyer, I trusted, and every word on the page was a word I was personally accountable for. I read the way Claire taught me to read documents, which is the way she read them slowly from the beginning, with the understanding that the thing you are looking for is usually not where they want you to look. Victor clears his throat after about 90 seconds. We can certainly walk you through the key provisions if that would be more efficient. I'm fine, I say without looking up. I prefer to read. A brief pause, then, of course. I turn to page 3, page 7, page 12. I am aware without looking up of the quality of attention in the room, shifting the way a room shifts when something expected is not happening on schedule. Marcus's pen has stopped clicking. Victoria has sat down. Daniel is very still to my left in a way that is different from ordinary stillness. The stillness of a man who is working very hard not to look at the other people at the table. I turn to page 22, page 31, page 38. I find the appendix at page 41. It begins with a heading amendment to voting rights and executive authority, supplemental provision 7, CE. The language beneath it is dense technical and written in the specific way that consequential things are written when the goal is to make them look inconsequential. I read it once. I read it again. The third time I read it aloud very quietly just to myself, just to make sure my understanding of what I am reading matches what the words actually say. It does. I close the document. I fold my hands on top of it. I look down the table at my son. Daniel, I say, and my voice is the voice I use in boardrooms when everything is under control, and I need the room to understand that calm even carrying the specific weight of someone who does not raise it because he does not need to. I have a few questions before I sign anything. Daniel looks at me. His jaw is tight and his eyes are careful, and somewhere behind them, something is moving that I recognize after 39 years as fear. Of course, he says, whatever you need. I have spent 40 years asking questions in rooms like this one. I have learned that the best questions are not the ones that prove what you know. They are the ones that invite the other person to prove it for you. I look at my son, and I say very pleasantly, who currently holds the right to appoint the members of the board of directors. Daniel blinks. It is a simple question, the kind of question that has a simple factual answer that any CEO should be able to produce without thinking. You do, he says. You and the major shareholders collectively according to the shareholder agreement. Good, I say. And who holds the right to veto any transaction valued above $50 million, a sale, a merger and acquisition? This time, Daniel glances at Victor before he answers, which is the first thing he should not have done, and Victor gives him nothing. Victor's face is the face of a man who has decided that the safest available expression is no expression at all, and Daniel looks back at me and says, You do, the chairman. Yes, I say. I do. I open the document to page 41. I turn it so that it faces Daniel, and I slide it across the mahogany table until it stops in front of him, and I place my index finger on the third paragraph of Supplemental Provision 7C, and I say in exactly the same pleasant voice I have been using since I sat down. Then perhaps you can help me understand why this paragraph transfers the right to appoint 4 of 5 board members to the sitting CEO, eliminates the chairman's veto on any transaction above $50 million, and permits the CEO to approve a merger or acquisition without board ratification, provided the deal closes within 90 days of this amendment taking effect. The room does something I have felt before, but cannot fully describe: a collective stillness, a change in the quality of the air, the sensation of several people simultaneously deciding what their face is going to do in the next 2 seconds and making different choices. Marcus Reed puts his pen down on the table with a small, precise click. Victor Hale straightens in his chair. Victoria's hand, which has been resting on the table, moves to her lap. Daniel stares at the paragraph. He reads it. I watch his eyes move across the lines, and I watch the color leave his face, the way color leaves a room when a cloud moves across the sun, gradually, then all at once. That's, he starts. That's what Daniel, that I ask. Victoria leans forward. Her voice is controlled and smooth, and carries the particular confidence of someone who is prepared for this moment and believes preparation is enough. Richard, I think you may be misreading the legal language. These provisions are standard in governance restructuring documents. They are designed to streamline decision, making not to alter the fundamental power structure. Is that right? I say. The intent, she begins. I'm not asking about the intent, I say. I'm asking about the words. The words say what the words say. I look at Victor. You drafted this, Victor. Is my reading of Supplemental Provision 7C incorrect? Victor Hale has survived 30 years of corporate law. By never saying anything, he cannot walk back. He looks at the document, looks at me, and says, there may be some ambiguity in the drafting that we should There is no ambiguity, I say. I've read it 3 times. I lean back in my chair, and I look at my son, who is still looking at the paragraph on page 41, with the expression of a man watching something he built fall over in slow motion. Daniel, is there anything you'd like to tell me? Daniel looks up. His eyes are red at the rims. Not crying, not yet, but close the specific redness of someone who has been fighting something for a long time and is beginning to lose the fight. He opens his mouth. He closes it. He looks at Victoria. Victoria says quickly, Richard, I think what would be helpful right now is if we took a short break and let Victor clarify. There was medication in the wine you brought to my home on Tuesday evening. I say. The sentence lands in the room like something dropped from a great height. For a moment, nobody moves. Then, Marcus Reed pushes his chair back from the table with a sound that is very loud in the silence that has followed what I just said. And he stands up and his voice comes out high and thin and stripped of every professional quality it usually carries. That was Victoria's idea. The medication, the documents, all of it. I want that on record right now. I told them it was too far. I told them, sit down, Marcus, Victor says sharply. I will not sit down. Marcus's hands are shaking visibly now, trembling against the sides of his trousers. I am not going to prison for... Nobody is going to prison, Victoria says. And she turns to me with a composure that is genuinely impressive, given everything that is happening, and she says, Richard, let's be reasonable adults. There has clearly been a miscommunication somewhere in this process, and I think if we step back from the emotion of this moment, I repeat, we can find a solution that works for everyone. Daniel deserves more operational freedom. You deserve to enjoy your retirement. Those goals are not incompatible. Soberer, Ispons in den Ba. Stop. Daniel's voice cuts across hers like something physical. He is on his feet, though. I did not see him stand, and his chair has rolled back behind him, and his face is doing something I have not seen it do since he was a teenager, crumpling and hardening at the same time, the face of someone losing a battle with themselves in public. He looks at his wife. Stop talking. Victoria stares at him. Daniel, I said stop. He turns to me, and his voice when he speaks to me is different. Raw, stripped of the performance he has been sustaining since the elevator cracked open at the edges, in a way that lets something genuine come through, even now, even here. You were never going to give it to me, were you? The chairmanship, the real control. You were always going to hold on to it. No, I say. Then what was it? His voice breaks on the last word, a fracture he cannot contain. What was all of this if you were always going to be the one with the power to stop everything? I reach into my briefcase. I take out the folder. I open it to the single page inside, and I set it on the table in front of my son, and I watch his eyes find his name at the top, and the date below it 6 months from now, his 40th birthday, and the title below that. And my signature already at the bottom, 4 months old, waiting for a morning I had planned to make into something he would remember for the rest of his life. His legs give out. He catches himself on the edge of the table with both hands, and a sound comes out of him that I will carry for the rest of my life. Not a word, not a cry, something between the two. The sound of a man understanding in a single moment the full cost of what he has done. I was going to give you everything, I tell him. 6 months from now, on your birthday. I never told you because I wanted it to be a gift. I look at my son. My son, who is shaking against the edge of the mahogany table, with tears running down his face, and his wife standing 3 feet away, unable to reach him, because she is the reason he is here. And I feel something tear open in my chest that I know with the certainty of someone who has lived long enough to know these things will not fully close again. You couldn't wait, Daniel. You listened to the wrong voice, and you couldn't wait. Daniel is still holding the edge of the table when I reach into my briefcase a second time and take out the USB drive. It is smaller than a thumb mat, black unremarkable in every physical respect. I set it on the table beside the folder with the quiet deliberateness of someone who has been waiting for this moment and has decided that the waiting is over. Then I reach forward and I plug it into the port on the small presentation panel built into the center of the table, the same panel that controls the projector screen on the east wall, the same projector system that lost its signal on Monday night in room 4, the same system that Emma Collins fixed in 2 minutes, while 4 people kept talking because they believed she wasn't listening. The screen behind Victor Hale comes to life. The first thing it shows is a log. Server access records time-stamped and formatted in the clean, unambiguous columns that IT systems generate when they are not trying to hide anything, and the people who access them thought nobody would ever look. The timestamp at the top reads Sunday 16:17 a.m. The IP address in the second column is one I have never seen before this week, and will not forget for the rest of my life, because Jonathan told me whose it was. Marcus Reed makes a sound that is not quite a word and not quite a groan and pushes back from the table for the second time. But this time, he does not stand. He just sits there with both hands pressed flat on his thighs, staring at his own IP address on a screen the size of a dining room table, and the color drains from his face so completely that the man who remains looks like a sketch of the man who was there a moment ago. The second document on the screen is the preliminary sale agreement, Daniel's signature at the bottom, the fund's letterhead at the top. The terms laid out in the clear, unambiguous language of a deal that was already done before today's meeting was ever scheduled. $25 million to Daniel Bennett upon close. $8 million to Sinclair Advisory Group, LLC registered in Delaware. Beneficial owner listed as a name I do not recognize. But Jonathan tells me belongs to Victoria's brother. $3 million to Marcus Reed. Position guaranteed. Victoria stands up. That document is privileged, she starts. It was obtained through a lawful investigation, I tell her. Sit down, Victoria. She does not sit down. She reaches for her phone on the table in front of her, and her fingers are moving across the screen with the fast-focused intensity of someone deleting things, and she is good at it. Quick practiced, but she has barely started when the boardroom door opens. Dr. Sonia Reeves walks in first. She is wearing a dark jacket and the same settled, unhurried authority she carried into Jonathan's office 2 days ago. And behind her are 3 people I have not met who carry themselves in the specific way that tells you without any identification being shown exactly what they do for a living. One of them moves directly to Victoria and takes the phone from her hand with a firmness that does not require force and says, "Ma'am, I need you to stop." Victoria's composure, that extraordinary, carefully constructed composure that has held through everything this morning, cracks. Not all the way, but enough. Her chin lifts and her eyes go bright and hard, and she says in a voice that is trying to be controlled and is no longer fully succeeding, "You cannot just walk in here and take my Special Agent Torres FBI," the man says. "And yes, ma'am, I can." Victor Hale closes his document folder. He does it carefully, methodically, like a man tidying his desk before a long absence. And then he folds his hands on top of it and says nothing at all, because Victor Hale has spent 30 years knowing exactly when there is nothing useful left to say. Marcus Reed is crying. Not dramatically, not the way Daniel cried a few minutes ago, but quietly, steadily, the tears of a man who made a calculation 11 months ago, and is only now fully understanding what he calculated away. He does not resist when Dr. Reeves's colleague approaches him. He stands when asked. He puts his hands where he is told to put them. I press the button on the presentation panel one more time. The server logs disappear from the screen. The sale agreement disappears. And then the room fills with sound Emma Collins is recording from Monday night, played through the boardroom speakers at a volume that leaves no ambiguity and no escape. Victoria's voice comes first clear and precise, and carrying the cold, efficient certainty of someone who has made up her mind. Once he signs you, appoint the new board, and we close the sale. He can keep his shares if that keeps him quiet, but he won't have the power to stop us. Then, Victor. The medication and the wine will keep him unfocused long enough to get through the documents. then Marcus. And if he figures it out afterward, then Victoria. Again. He won't. Not in time. And then Daniel's voice lower than the others, with something in it that I choose to believe is reluctance. Though I understand I may be choosing that, because I need to. Okay. Friday. We make it Friday. The recording ends, the screen goes dark. The room is very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet after something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Dr. Reeves looks at me. Mr. Bennett, are you all right? Yes, I tell her. Thank you for being here. She nods once and returns to her work, which is considerable because there are 4 people in this room who are all about to have a very different Friday than the one they planned. Victoria is escorted to the door first. She walks with her chin up and her shoulders back and the specific dignity of someone who has decided that how you leave a room matters even when you have no choice about leaving it. At the door, she turns and looks at Daniel, not with love, not with anger, but with the assessing look of someone calculating what use, if any, remains for what they are looking at. And then she walks out, and the door closes, and she is gone. Marcus goes next, still crying, still quiet, already talking to the agent beside him in the fast, low voice of a man who has decided that cooperation is his best available option. Victor goes after briefcase in hand, already composing in his expression the argument he will make to his own attorney in approximately 45 minutes. That leaves Daniel. He is still at the table. He has not moved since his legs gave out against the edge of it. He is standing now, straightened, composed, the tears dried on his face, and he looks at me with the eyes of a man who has run out of everything except the truth of what he has done, and the knowledge that I am his father, and I am standing across a table from him, and there is nothing left between us except that. You trusted a stranger over your own blood, he says. His voice is very quiet. It is the voice he has had since he was a boy, the real one underneath everything else, the one that sounds like him and no one else. No, I tell him. I keep my voice as quiet as his because this is not a moment for volume. This is a moment for precision. You made a stranger more trustworthy than blood. Those are not the same thing. He looks at me for a long moment, and what I see is Claire, her eyes, her jawline, the way she used to look at me when she had already decided something and was waiting for me to catch up. Then Dr. Reeves's colleague touches his arm, and he goes. The door closes. I am alone in the boardroom of the company I built. From a $5 bill and 40 years of mornings and the city outside the window is doing what it always does, indifferent and enormous and continuous, and I put both hands flat on the mahogany table, and I lean on them, and I breathe, and I let the room be what it is, which is the place where everything changed, and I stay there until I am ready to leave it. It takes a while. The days after that Friday have a quality I did not expect. I expected relief. I expected the particular exhaustion that follows sustained effort. The feeling of a long project concluded the body's insistence on rest after a week of running on something other than sleep. What I did not expect was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that sits in a room after something loud has happened and won't fully leave, the kind that makes you aware of every surface and every corner and everything that used to fill the space that is no longer there. Bennett Logistics is still standing. 4,000 people still have their jobs. The sale did not go through. By any reasonable measure, the week ended well. I sit with that for several days before I fully believe it. Jonathan calls on Saturday morning with the first official update. The federal indictment process has begun. A grand jury has been convened, which means 12 citizens of the Southern District of New York are now in possession of the server logs. The lab results, the preliminary sale agreement, and 30 seconds of audio recorded in a restaurant on a Monday night by a young woman with a law school textbook in her locker, and more courage than most people I have known in 65 years of living. The charges being considered are substantial conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, document forgery, administering a controlled substance without consent, and obstruction of justice for Victoria's attempt to delete her phone in the boardroom. Marcus Reed has retained counsel, and Jonathan tells me, with the neutrality of a man reporting a weather forecast, is cooperating fully with investigators. Victor Hale, I ask. Also cooperating, Jonathan says, which is consistent with his professional history. Victor has always understood which way the wind is blowing. I ask about Daniel. Jonathan is quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, but the silence of someone choosing between several true things and picking the one that will land most cleanly. Daniel has retained Mitchell Greaves, he says. He's good, better than good. Daniel is not going to walk away from this without consequences, Richard. But he's not going to be destroyed by it either, if that's what you're asking. It is what I'm asking. I don't say so, but Jonathan has known me for 23 years. On Monday, I go into the office for the first time since Friday. The building feels the way buildings feel, after significant events subtly altered the same in every physical respect and different in every other. I take the elevator to the 32nd floor, and I walk past the boardroom without going in, and I go to my old office at the end of the hall, the one I kept when I transitioned to the chairmanship. Small and east-facing with a view of the building across the street instead of the skyline, and I sit at the desk and I begin the work of putting things back together. I appoint an interim CEO by Tuesday afternoon, Margaret Okafor, our Chief Operating Officer, 15 years with the company. The sharpest operational mind in the building, and the person Claire always said should have been in the succession conversation from the beginning. Margaret accepts the role with the specific gravity of someone who understands exactly what they are being handed and exactly why. And she looks at me across my desk and says, "I'll take care of them, Richard." And she means the 4,000 people, not the company. And that distinction is why I chose her. I spend Wednesday with Jonathan restructuring the governance documents, building in 3 independent parties required for any change to voting rights, eliminating the loopholes that Victor Hale found. Because Victor Hale is very good at his job, and the documents were not good enough. Jonathan works with the focus and controlled fury of a man who takes pride in building things that hold, and we finish at 7 in the evening, and he looks at the final version and says, "Nobody gets through this one." And I believe him. On Thursday, I write a letter. Not to my lawyer, not to the board, not to any of the institutional recipients. A letter from a man in my position might reasonably be addressed to. I write it to Daniel, and I write it by hand on the same heavy cream stationery Claire always kept on the desk in the study. I tell him I will not be intervening in the legal process. That is not mine to control, and I would not control it if I could, because the law is not personal, and I am not above it, and neither is he. I tell him that the chairmanship document is in Jonathan's safe, and that when this is over, when the process has run its course, and the consequences have been what they will be, I would like to sit down with him and talk. Not about the company, about us, about the conversation we should have had 2 years ago or 3 or 10. I tell him the door is not closed. I tell him his mother would have wanted me to say that. I believe it is true. Jonathan arranges through Dr. Reeves for Emma Collins to be officially notified that the individuals who posed a risk to her safety are in federal custody, and that she is free to resume her normal life without concern. The notification goes through Maggie Cooper. Jonathan calls Maggie directly on Thursday afternoon and speaks to her for about 4 minutes. And Maggie, who is a woman of considerable composure and very few unnecessary words, says, "Thank you," and hangs up and calls Emma. And Emma calls Jonathan's office back within the hour to confirm she has received the message. I am not on that call, but Jonathan tells me that her voice when she spoke sounded like someone putting something very heavy down after carrying it for a long time. On Friday evening, 1 week to the hour after I stood alone in that boardroom with my hands on the mahogany table, I sit in Claire's chair by the window, and I look at the city and I say out loud to the room, "I kept it, the company, the people. I kept what you asked me to keep." The room does not answer. The room never does. But I sleep that night for the first time in a week, and when I wake up on Saturday morning, the first thing I think is that I need to be somewhere at 7:30. She is behind the counter when I walk in, and she sees me the moment I come through the door, and she goes very still. Not the stillness of someone who is calm, the stillness of someone who has been moving through the last week on the specific adrenaline that comes from doing something frightening and surviving it, and who has now, at the sight of me, run out of adrenaline completely. She is holding a coffee pot in her right hand, and she is standing at the end of the counter near the espresso machine, and when our eyes meet, she takes one breath that I can see from across the room, deep visible the breath of someone who has been holding themselves together and is now for the first time not sure they have to. Maggie Cooper is behind the counter too, wiping down the steam wand with the focused attention she gives to everything. And she looks up when I come in and something moves across her face, not a smile exactly, but the expression that precedes a smile in people who have learned to be careful about when they show them. She gives me the short nod. The same nod she has given me every morning for 2 years. Somehow, this morning, it means more than it ever has. I walk to my table. I sit down. I put my coat over the back of the chair the way I always do, and I take out my newspaper the way I always do, and I do not open it, because some mornings the newspaper is a prop, and this is one of them. Emma comes to my table. She walks the way she walked the first morning I ever sat here, steady, purposeful, the walk of someone who knows where she is going and why. except that this morning her eyes are doing something they did not do, then which is filling up with tears that she is refusing through visible and considerable effort to let fall. She sets the coffee cup down. She turns it right side up. She pours. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," she says, and her voice is almost completely steady, which I suspect has cost her something. "Good morning, Emma," I say. "How are you?" She laughs a short, surprised sound, as if the ordinariness of the question has caught her off guard, and she says, "I honestly don't know. I've been asking myself that for a week, and I keep getting a different answer." "That sounds about right," I tell her. She stands at the edge of my table with the coffee pot in both hands, and she looks at me with the direct, unguarded look of someone who is past the point of performing composure. "Are you okay?" she asks. "I mean, really, are you—" The question lands differently than I expect. In the last week, people have asked me variations of that question in the professional register. "How are you holding up? Richard, is there anything you need?" The board is behind you fully, and those questions are kind, and I have answered them carefully, and none of them have made me feel the way this one does, which is seen. Seen clearly by someone who is asking, because she genuinely wants to know and has no other reason to ask. "I'm getting there," I tell her honestly. "Some parts are harder than others." She nods. She understands this, I think, in the specific way that people understand things they have also lived through. I reach into my coat pocket and take out the $5 bill I folded there this morning. I set it on the table beside the coffee cup and smooth it flat with 2 fingers the way I always do. And Emma looks at it and then looks at me and says firmly and without apology, "I can't take that, Mr. Bennett. What I didn't do it for a tip. I did it because it was right. Taking money for it would make it into something it wasn't." "I know," I say. "That's not what this is." She frowns slightly, not with displeasure, but with the particular focused attention she gives to things she is trying to understand. "Then what is it?" I look at the bill on the table. I have looked at this bill, or one like it, the same denomination repeated across 40 years of mornings, more times than I can count. And I have never said out loud to anyone except Claire what I'm about to say now. But Claire is gone, and this young woman put herself in danger on my behalf, because she believed that kindness deserved an answer, and I think she has earned the truth of it. 40 years ago. I say, I was 25 years old, and I was driving a truck on the I-95 service road outside of the city, and I ran out of gas. I had exactly $5 in my wallet. I stopped at a diner near the service road, and I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. And when I was done, I realized that paying for the coffee would leave me 83 cents short of the gas I needed to make my delivery. I pause. A waitress was watching me do the math. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't make a speech. She picked up the $5 I had left on the table, and she pressed it back into my hand, and she said, "And I have heard these words every day for 40 years. She said, "Keep it. Today you need it more than I do." Emma has gone very still. The coffee pot in her hands has not moved. "I used that $5 to buy gas," I tell her. "I made the delivery. I got the contract." Bennett Logistics started on a Wednesday morning because a woman I had never met decided that a stranger's need was more important than her tip. I look at Emma. I went back to find her. The diner was closed. I never learned her name. I have left $5 on tables in diners ever since because it is the only way I know to keep saying thank you to someone who will never hear me say it. The dining room continues around us. Cups, voices, the hiss of the espresso machine, the bell above the door chiming as someone comes in from the October morning, and Emma Collins stands at the edge of my table and stares at me. And I watch the expression on her face do something I have never seen an expression do before, which is move through several different things in rapid succession, surprise, then recognition, then something deeper and more complicated that I cannot name, something that is pulling at her from somewhere I cannot see. "Mr. Bennett," she says, and her voice has changed. It is quieter now, and careful, the voice of someone walking towards something they are not sure they are ready to reach. "Can you describe her?" The waitress. "Can you describe the diner? Mike is steig. Why fix downspass?" I look at her. There is something in the question, in the specific urgency of it, in the way she is leaning forward slightly without realizing she is doing it, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up in the way it stands up when something important is about to happen, and your body knows it before your mind does. "Why?" I ask. Her hand goes to the pocket of her apron, then stops, then slowly moves to her waist where her apron strings are tied, and she reaches behind her and unties them, and she says in a voice that is barely above a whisper, "Because I think I need to show you something." She reaches behind the counter, not into her apron, she has already untied it, and set it on the stool beside the register. and it sits there now, like something she has put down and is not sure she will need again today. She reaches into the small shelf beneath the counter where the staff keep their personal things during their shifts. A phone, a set of keys, a paperback with a cracked spine, and she takes out her wallet. It is a plain thing, brown leather worn at the corners, the wallet of someone who has more important things to spend money on than a new wallet. She unsnaps it and opens it and looks inside for a moment, and I watch her face in that moment, the way it moves through something private and unresolved, the way it does when a person is deciding whether they are ready for what comes next. And then she takes out a photograph. It is small, the kind of photograph that gets printed at a drugstore and carried in a wallet for years until the edges go soft and the colors shift slightly toward yellow. She holds it for a moment, face down against her palm, and she looks at me with eyes that are no longer trying to hold anything back, and she says, "My mother, her name was Helen Collins. She worked at a diner in this neighborhood for about 3 years before it closed." Her voice is steady, but it is the steadiness of someone gripping something hard. She passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 58. She sets the photograph on the table in front of me, face up, and she takes her hand away. The world goes quiet. I have heard people use that expression before, and I have always understood it as a figure of speech, a way of describing the experience of sudden shock or overwhelming emotion. I understand now that it is not a figure of speech. It is a literal description of what happens to perception when something too large to process arrives. All at once, the dining room sounds. The espresso machine, the bell above the door, the voices of the other customers, all of it recedes to a place so far back that it might as well not be there. And what remains is a 4x6 photograph of a young woman standing in front of a diner wearing a white apron with a small logo on the pocket, smiling at whoever is behind the camera with the ease of someone who does not know the photograph is going to matter. I know that face. I have not seen it in 40 years. I could not have told you before this moment whether I would recognize it after 40 years, whether memory works that way, whether a face seen once under pressure on a winter morning in 1985 could survive 4 decades intact, enough to be identified in a photograph in a diner in Lower Manhattan on an October Saturday morning. It can, it does. My hands start shaking before I am aware that they have started shaking. I become conscious of it because the coffee cup rattles against the table when I press my fingers flat to steady myself. And the sound is small, but Maggie Cooper hears it from behind the counter and looks up. And the look on her face when she sees my expression is the look of someone watching something they did not expect to witness and are not sure how to respond to. "And that's her," I say. The words come out of me in a voice I do not entirely recognize, thinner than my usual voice scraped down to something underneath it. "Emma, that's her. That's the woman from the diner." Emma makes a sound that is not a word. It is the sound a person makes when something they suspected, but could not allow themselves to fully believe, turns out to be true. A small, broken sound, halfway between a breath and a sob, that comes from somewhere deep in the chest and escapes before it can be stopped. She puts both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders start shaking, and the tears that she has been refusing to cry for the last 10 minutes come all at once spilling down her face in the way that tears come when they have been held back too long and are no longer asking permission. "She talked about you," Emma says through her hands, through the tears, through the shaking. "She talked about you my whole life. She never knew your name. She didn't know what happened to you after. She always said she hoped you made it. She said she left that job 6 months later, and she always wondered." She stops. She breathes. She tries again. "She wondered if the delivery went through. She wondered if you were okay. She never found out." I cannot speak. This is a new experience for me. See, I have spoken in front of boards of directors, in front of investors, in front of rooms of 400 people, and my voice has never failed to be available to me. It is not available to me now. What I feel in this moment is so far outside the vocabulary of the last 65 years that language has simply stopped being useful. I look at the photograph. I look at Helen Collins at 24 or 25 standing in front of a diner that would close 8 months later, smiling, with no idea that the $5 she gave back to a young driver that morning was going to build a company that would employ 4,000 people, that her daughter was going to walk into that company's chairman's life 40 years later on a Monday night in a private dining room. That kindness, the specific, unremarkable, everyday kindness of pressing $5 into a stranger's hands because he needed it more, was going to travel across 4 decades and come back. Maggie Cooper has come out from behind the counter. She is standing at the edge of the dining room with a dish towel over her shoulder and her arms crossed and her eyes bright. And she is not pretending to be doing anything else because some moments are too large for pretending. I reach into my inside jacket pocket. I take out the envelope I put there this morning, before I left the house, the one I prepared Thursday evening at my desk, in the same study where Claire used to sit and read while I worked at the desk where I wrote Daniel's birthday document 4 months ago, and the letter to Daniel 3 days ago, and this now, the last thing. I set it on the table. This is a full scholarship for the remainder of your time at Fordham Law, I say. My voice has come back, though it is not entirely steady, and I am not going to pretend that it is. Every remaining semester fully covered. No conditions, no obligations. I pause. There is also a letter from Jonathan Pierce offering you a position in Bennett Logistics' legal department, an internship, structured as a genuine legal training position, not a ceremonial one. The start date is contingent on the conclusion of the federal proceedings, because you will likely be called as a witness, and I will not put you in a position of conflict. When it is done, if you want it, the position is yours. Emma stares at the envelope. She does not touch it. She looks at me with her face still wet and her hands still shaking, and she says, "Mr. Bennett, that is, I can't accept something like that. I didn't do what I did so that you would, align, sir." "I know you didn't," I tell her. "That is precisely why I'm giving it to you." I look at the photograph of Helen Collins still on the table between us. "Your mother gave me $5 because I needed it, and she had it, and that was sufficient reason. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because it was the right thing to do." I look at Emma. "You did the same thing. You did it in a different room 40 years later, with a phone instead of a $5 bill. And the result, if you'll allow me to say so, was not entirely different." Emma laughs. It is a wet, undone, completely unguarded laugh. The laugh of someone who has been crying and is suddenly, unexpectedly also somewhere on the edge of joy. And she picks up the envelope with both hands and holds it against her chest and closes her eyes. And I watch her breathe, and the dining room comes back around us, and Maggie Cooper makes a sound from the edge of the room that is very close to a sob that she is converting with considerable effort into a cough. I pick up the $5 bill from the table. I hold it out to Emma. She opens her eyes. She looks at it. She takes it from my hand not the way you take a tip, not with the practiced professional ease of someone accepting something they are accustomed to accepting, but carefully with both hands the way you take something you understand the weight of. She folds it, she opens her wallet, she slides it in beside the photograph of her mother. "Same $5, she says quietly. "Different hands?" "In same $5. I agree. Still traveling. SD. People ask me sometimes if I regret not telling Daniel sooner. Not reporters. I have not spoken to reporters, and I do not intend to. Not colleagues or board members who understand that some questions are not asked in professional settings, even when everyone in the room is already thinking them. The people who ask are the ones who know me well enough to ask things that might land hard, Jonathan, over dinner one evening in November. Margaret Okafor in passing after a board meeting that ran long. My doctor, Dr. Rubin, who has known me for 18 years and treats the line between physician and friend with considerable flexibility. I tell them all the same thing. No, I don't regret not telling him sooner. I regret the choice he made. Those are not the same thing, and keeping them separate is, I have found the only way to carry both of them at once without being crushed by either. Daniel's case is moving through the federal system with the particular slowness of cases that involve 4 defendants, 3 separate legal teams, and a cooperating witness. The process will take the time it takes. I have stopped trying to predict it and started trying to accept it, which is harder than it sounds and more necessary than I expected. I have not seen Daniel since that Friday. The letter I wrote him on Claire's stationery, the one that said the door was not closed, went through Jonathan, who confirmed it was received. There has been no response. I am not surprised. I am not, if I am honest with myself, entirely without hope. The company is in good hands. Margaret Okafor runs the 32nd floor with a focused efficiency that makes the quarterly numbers look better than they have in 3 years. She calls me on Tuesday mornings to ask my opinion on things I would have insisted on deciding myself 18 months ago, and I give my opinion and she makes her own decision, which is exactly how it should work. When I walk through the lobby, the people who have worked there for years still stop to say good morning, and their good mornings feel the same as they always have. That is what Claire asked me to protect. The building was never the point. The people were always the point. Emma Collins is in her final semester at Fordham Law. She sits for the bar in February, New York State, 2 days of testing across constitutional law, contracts, evidence, and the essays that separate the lawyers who prepared from the ones who only thought they did. And she calls Jonathan's office once a month to confirm the internship is still available and to ask what she should be reading. Jonathan's paralegal, who has been with him for 16 years and is not easily impressed, told him last week that Emma is the most prepared pre-intern she has ever spoken to. Jonathan told me this over the phone, and I felt something that took me a moment to identify because I have not felt it in some time. It was pride. The clean, uncomplicated kind, the kind you feel for someone who has earned something real and is going to keep on earning it. Every Saturday morning, I am at Maple Corner at 7:30. Maggie Cooper has made the corner table available without ever saying so. The way she makes things happen in this diner through small, deliberate acts, she would describe, if asked as simply, how the place runs. The Americano is always ready. The blueberry muffin arrives without being ordered, and Emma brings it. She is not always on the Saturday morning shift. Some Saturdays she is in the law library. Some Saturdays she is sleeping the sleep of someone who stayed up too late with case law the night before. But most Saturdays she is here, and most Saturdays we talk for a few minutes before the breakfast rush makes conversation impractical about her evidence professor, brilliant and exhausting in equal measure, about the appellate case she has been tracking for her advocacy seminar, about the particular cruelty of studying commercial paper on 4 hours of sleep. I tell her about the company, about a logistics contract in the Pacific Northwest that added 200 jobs last month, about the governance restructuring Jonathan and I built to make sure October cannot happen again. She listens the way she has always listened fully, with both eyes asking the question that follows naturally from the last thing said, the way people listen when they are genuinely interested, and not simply waiting for their turn to speak. Before I leave each Saturday morning, I take a $5 bill from my coat pocket and set it on the table. She does not refuse it anymore. She picks it up, opens her wallet, and slides it in beside the photograph, Helen Collins, 24 years old, standing in front of a diner on a winter morning in 1985, smiling, with no idea of what that smile was going to mean. She snaps the wallet closed and says every Saturday the same thing she said the first Saturday. I'll bring it back next week. And she does. Every week the same $5 travels from my pocket to her wallet, to her apron pocket, to my table, and back again, moving in a small, steady circle, the way kindness moves when it has found the people it belongs to and decided to stay with them. This morning, the light comes through the window at the angle I have come to know better than my own reflection. It falls across my table and catches the rim of the coffee cup, and the city beyond the glass is doing what it always does, enormous, indifferent, continuous, full of people carrying things, most of them alone, some of them lucky enough to have help arriving from a direction they never anticipated. I set the $5 bill on the table. I smooth it flat with 2 fingers. Emma comes through the kitchen door. She sees it. She smiles, the real one, the one that starts in the chest and doesn't ask permission, and she reaches for it, and for one moment before she picks it up, we are both looking at it, this worn, ordinary piece of currency that has traveled further and done more work than either of us will ever fully understand. Helen Collins pressed it into a stranger's hand 40 years ago, because he needed it more than she did. Her daughter carried it across a dining room 40 years later for the same reason, and now it sits on a table in Lower Manhattan on a December morning, and the coffee is strong, and the light is exactly right, and I am where I am supposed to be. The $5 stays. It always has. I have told you this family story because I believe it needs to be told. Not because I handled everything perfectly, I did not. I held on to a secret that could have changed everything if I had simply spoken it out loud. If you are carrying something important, something that could protect the people you love, say it. Do not wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment does not come. I learned that the hard way. This family betrayal did not break me, but it changed me in ways I am still mapping. I have come to believe, and I say this as a man who does not use these words lightly, that God places the right people at the right tables at the right moments. Emma Collins did not walk into my life by accident. Neither did her mother 40 years before her. What I know now is this family story does not always mean the people who share your blood. Sometimes it means the strangers who choose you again and again across decades you were not even there to witness. And family betrayal, the real kind, the kind that costs you sleep, is survivable. I am proof of that. If this story moves something in, you leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. A note before our next story. Some narratives ahead contain fictional elements constructed for reflection and moral guidance. If that is not what you were looking for today, we understand. Choose what serves you best.